Hello, everyone. This is Anthony with the Dragons of Victory, and I'm very happy once again to be joined by Anton and Shonda. He's been on a couple times already. We discussed, his, my faith journey, his faith journey, and you know, where we agree and where we disagree at times, and then we got more into the crux of our I think most people's issues with their belief in faith, and that's the oppressive, uh, kind of ridiculous, very ridiculous sexual ethic of the Catholic Church. And so now, what I wanted to talk to Anton about is to get a bit more practical and real world in our analysis here, because it's not the show's not about politics. I'm not here. I mean, to a degree, we get into that, of course, but that's not the trad Catholicism is the focus of the Dragons of Victory. But with the recent election results, somewhat, uh, to some unexpected election results, although they weren't quite as unexpected for me, unfortunately. All that being said, traditional Catholicism has an interesting future ahead of it because there's a whole lot of different factors going on that can, on the one hand, help them grow uh, as a result of the election and help them get bigger, but at the same time, there's other cultural things going on that I think that are significantly diminishing their message and diminishing their effect. So it's a very complicated thing, but Anton, thank you for coming on. Do you have anything to declare before we get started here?
Thanks for having me back on, Anthony. It's always good to have these conversations, and I know that. Well, spoiler alert! I know you're going to be hopping on Kevin's channel, so I really look forward to that. So there's kind of like an expanded
Yeah,
podcast universe happening here. Yeah, no, I
yeah, a
don't really have
little
anything to
bit.
add to the open statement. So, mhm.
Thank you. Well, what I'll start off by saying, Anton, is that, you know, what I've gathered from you in our conversations is that you are in a similar sort of on a similar path and road that I was and that Kevin was, and that many people who are part of this, like you mentioned, this expanded universe online community of people who were
Mhm.
were grew up, neck deep in this you could say extremism, hardcore beliefs, and a structure that is altogether very intense and very focused. It's a bunch of people who
Mhm.
are um, it's led by motivated people who have an idea of who are firmly convinced that they understand how the world works better than anyone else, and that if the rest of the world would just get on the same page, uh, everything would be perfect, everything would be great. That is the basic problem of cult-like structures, cult-like organizations. I need to be more careful sometimes to not just say cult, uh, to not just throw that label out, to be more like, nuanced, because I think nuance is beautiful, right?
Mhm.
Uh, information is is the is the is the best disinfectant. They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Well, to me, that just means information is. But the mindset you get in when you've convinced yourself that you're on the exact right path and you know exactly what you're supposed to do to create a better future, you're you're not interested in new information. You discount you're not concerned at all with searching, with learning. You, there's a part of your brain that says, "I'm done with that. I finished the learning part. Now it's the action part." And I just think we're, as humans, we need to perpetually be in a learning state. So to get more to get more grounded and specific here, uh, Trump won the election. The evangelical right, especially in America, has latched themselves onto him, despite the obvious, contradictions in the in their, in their doctrine and in their beliefs and their ethical code and this and the figurehead they've chosen to push those. I mean, it's no point in getting into specifics.
Hmm.
We're all aware of what I mean
Yeah.
here. What I want to ask you, Anton, is it's a question of hypocrisy, right? It's a question of like, for me, you can die when I'm talking about the arguments that traditional Catholicism makes, and more broadly speaking, the attitudes and the doctrine and the structure that is within traditional Catholicism and more broadly evangelical Christianity, the right wing, you could say, their Achilles heel so often is that they can make all the best, their arguments could be as compelling as possible, as cogent as possible, that they can their words and their actions and their presentation can be very, very compelling and convincing. But then you look at their behavior. You've become aware about other things they did. The whole there's this thing on the right wing where they don't think that it seems like they don't think that hypocrisy is as big a deal as they should. I don't think they're so willing to Trump and the porn stars and the fact that he was found liable of rape in court. Uh, they're just so it seems so easy for them on the right, not for everybody, but for a large number of them, it's so easy for them to just, you know, discount the hypocritical nature of this, the when in their mind it's all for the greater good. If we just enact our vision on the world, it'll just make things so much better that these issues won't matter anymore. But they're still going to be there. The issues of hypocrisy, the issues of, you know, of this whole thing seeming to lack any integrity at all when these issues come about. What are your thoughts, Anton?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I think there is very much a situation of double standards. Like, um, let me try to see if I can put it in a more direct way. But, um, like I think it's very often said that Catholic morality is not about the ends justifying the means, and yet, kind of piggybacking on a really corrupt political party is justifying the means to the end they want, which is also kind of strange, but I don't know if you've noticed it, but there have been so many apologists for monarchy. So all of a sudden, like, they're against censorship, they're against authoritarianism, especially if it's leftist communism or whatever they deem leftist communist Marxism and all of their buzzwords. And yet when it's their guy and their agenda, they're totally fine with censorship, authoritarianism, and monarchy. So there are these weird double standards that it's okay when we do it,
Right.
but if it's someone that we our in group deems harmful to the how we see the world and it's harmful to the general population, then no. Then so definitely the issue of double standards. There's also the funny thing with I know that like I've kept as much as I can stomach. I'll check in with like the big names and trad influencers, the Marshalls, the Halls, the Gordons, and all of that. And they'll always have these sort of these lines for plausible deniability, like, oh yeah, we don't celebrate Trump and he's a flawed guy, blah blah blah. And then, they'll say that, but he's correct in abortion, he's correct on marriage, and all of these very typical Catholic issues. But the giveaway for me is that they keep saying that they don't approve of Trump, but they also get extremely giddy and ecstatic every time Trump does something they like, and they just totally fangirl over him. And I don't mean to get so
Yeah.
gendered, but literally even these like macho cigar smoking whiskey guzzling macho man, they literally like they are like girls around Brad Pitt. Like they're just so excited. So there's that dead giveaway. And I think You're right. I think that I don't want to discount trad Catholicism's ideas about the world necessarily, but there are two things that really um, are sort of huge problems, and for me are a giveaway of the toxicity of the situation. It's one thing if there's as you know, there's a lot of thought that's been put over the centuries. Even if there are some ideas that are problematic, it's a collection of thoughts and reflections and philosophy and theology. But the two big issues are, even if these are ideas worth discussion, one, there's always the looming threat of, if you don't buy into our system, you're going to hell. I mean, people will soften the language around that, but there's a lot of that impending threat in the background, like, oh, if you don't completely buy into it, you're putting your soul at risk, is putting it nicely. And others will be like, oh, there's no salvation unless you pick this path. So there's that one. There's the issuing of a very severe threat. And I think the other thing too is just that attitude of like triumphalism and arrogance, that maybe let's just throw them a bone. They have a lot of logic and clarity when it comes to their worldview, but it almost always, at least with the big names and the big influencers, it always comes with the complete absence of charity and empathy. That they don't even bother to entertain ideas that are different, which brings me to, like, one of my favorite quotes is the mark of an educated mind is to be able to entertain an idea without necessarily accepting it. So at the very least, like, they could make an effort to, they don't have to agree with the people who disagree with them, but could they at least have the grace that they will entertain ideas that are foreign to their worldview in an attempt to genuinely understand it, rather than just straw manning everything and dismissing it and condemning it and being extremely condescending. But yeah, that would be like my opening rant about the situation.
No, yeah, I'm totally with you on all that. I agree. It gets hard to stomach their content.
Oh man, yeah,
But if we're gonna
indigestion
do,
24/7.
yeah, but every job has its it has its downsides, has its headaches, and this what we chose to do in terms of get our experiences out there, our thoughts out there. Obviously, it's going to come with some unpleasant stuff, like anything you do is. But at the same time, the it teaches. I'm glad it's upsetting and annoying on a personal level, but it's a very good it, it's very important to understand and be aware of where they're at and everything because it's part of the reason it's so upset it's such a headache is the toxicity within against each other, because it's not th their relationships are so like I've seen people like Nick Cavazos, the traditional Thomist and Kennedy Hall recently comment on the how tradcath culture is a cesspool. That they're sick of it. The people within it.
Mhm.
It's all people backstabbing each other, people pretending to be friends. I I can say without a shadow of a doubt that me and Anton and me and Cade and me and Kevin genuinely like each other and find each other's company interesting and we enjoy talking to each other. But you really get the sense with these commentators that um, it's all relationships. Uh, you know, they are just as susceptible and immersed to all the various jealousies and greed motivations and the reason this channel hasn't done for this Dragon's Victory hasn't done as well as it could have is because I'm not thinking of it that way. I'm trying to come across this from as real and honest this place as possible. And when you start getting into thinking about the algorithm and the view count and all that, you're turning this into something that it's not. But you see that with all of them. And again, it's just the hypocrisy gets more and that I was talking about earlier gets more and more apparent because these people are all claiming to have the stuff. Like every cult believes they have the stuff. They have the secret ingredient. The only problem is that, the rest of the world is either too stupid or too evil to want the secret ingredient. I mean, if it truly was the secret ingredient, if it
Hmm.
truly was the thing that was going to fix everything, but you're against it, well, you're the enemy of mankind. That that just never there there is to quote Kung Fu Panda. I firmly believe there is no secret ingredient. Um, but that's just a concept, an idea that's just almost it for these people to entertain that, like you said, to entertain that idea or to briefly live in a world where that's possible. It seems like for them it would just be they couldn't handle it. Like you hear this sometimes when like they couldn't personally handle it. Like they say things like, I don't want to live in a world without meaning. I don't want to live in a world where a God doesn't exist who loves me and created me. But they also at the same time, the hardcore trad will talk about like, well, this is the church's hard truths. This is just the way it is. It's the hard teaching. They come they come at it so often with an attempt to make it all very scientific and very rational and clinical, which is so that's when it really gets insane when some of the hardcore trads try to make all of this not about emotion at all, not about, but simply about cold hard fact and reality.
That's
But
actually a
again,
really big point. Yeah, like
go ahead,
there's
yeah, go
something
ahead.
very oh, sorry, no, I just like you hit on a point that's very like something that I've been really wrestling with too. Just you're right, because I mean, I can't have a discussion with you without bringing out our good old buddy Chad Ripperger, right? Like, there's just something about him, like point A leads to B leads to C, and there's a very clear cut logic about it. Except when you realize that you're completely leaving out human emotion, human desire, human whimsy, all of the things that differentiate us from robots, or differentiate us from the rest of the animal kingdom that sort of just operates based on a kind of survival instinct. I think humans have a kind of inner whimsy and artistry and desire. And yeah, it can get messy and harmful at times, and we got to rein it in. But to push it to the point where we're so neurotically skeptical of ourselves, and engaging in perpetual like self-flagellation over our most human elements of our spirit,
Right.
it can really, like, it's a recipe for mental illness, man. It's really dangerous stuff.
Well, I mean, I, I'm living proof of that. I mean, I've always had since I can remember, I've always had a very um intense interior life, and I've come to learn growing up that it's almost 10 times more than the average person experiences. And there's again, it's not just it's not just a matter of like, oh, these 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 people are arrogant and condescending and kind of crazy, but like, oh whatever. No, when you're neck deep in that environment, it gets it it gets really serious and really ugly and really dark,
Hmm.
and that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm trying to, in whatever way I can, speak out about this, because people just need to understand that th- these people are not. It's not just that these people are misguided. They are to a degree dangerous. Now it's tricky when you say that because most people involved in traditional Catholicism are not dangerous, but they are inadvertently part of a dangerous mechanism and structure. And getting back to the future, where this goes from here, I've been asked about by people like the shelf life of traditional Catholicism, because if one thing that you look into their commentary right now is that all they're doing is reacting to Francis and getting more and more upset, more and more agitated, but they don't know how to address it. When traditional Catholics try to when you go into their listen to their commentary with people like Marshall and Hall and Ripperger and all of them, they're all so subdivided into the supporters of FSSP and SSPX and Sedevacantist and this and that and on and yada yada. They're admitting themselves that they can't figure out this problem. They don't. They keep saying, well, we just have to wait for God to intervene. We just have to wait for Francis to die, which gets pretty morbid and at times it's like they're hoping it's like they're wishing for it. You can see it. And they're constantly like, readjusting and being like, oh, maybe I went too far there in my criticism, but it's like it drives you insane because it's insoluble. There's just too, and if you look at it just objectively and scientifically, there's too many factors that they're just ignoring. They're just being willfully blind to. And you have to acknowledge when you're discussing this that we are emotional creatures. We're rational and emotional, and those things go together. You can't separate the two. One thing I'm seeing with AI is that when you when you use AI a lot and when you really get familiar with it and how it sees the world, it is like you're this objective third person almost it's almost like you're referring to this godlike quote unquote intelligence to give you information or to do things for you without the bullshit of emotion or that get in the way of that prevent us from executing tasks. um but our emotions is what makes us who we are. Um we are tremendously powerful. We're the most powerful beings as of now on the planet, but we are not um, that all-knowing kind of intellect that knows exactly what to do and knows everything. It's not doesn't exist, but we feel like it must, and that's the issue here. And so people have asked me, yeah, like what in terms of traditional Catholicism, where is this going? Are they going to get bigger? Are they going to get more influence? Especially now that Trump's won. I've just been looking at, the history of the past few years, and it's clear to me that, I've definitely started to understand Trump a lot more than I did. Um, I think that clearly he's a bad person, but it's a different kind of bad. I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes when I say this, and whatever, but the comparison's been made before that he, in a lot of ways, reminds me of the Joker from The Dark Knight. Um, Obviously, the Joker is a worse person, but there's a very similar thing to both of them where they have no core. They have no um, they live in the moment more than any of us could really understand, and they are so empty, and there's such a profound void inside, a profound emptiness that all they have, literally all they have, is watching reactions to them. Is is their only both of them, their only goal in life is to react to their actions and see and watch the intense reaction that because they feel inside so insignificant, so empty, so nothing. They feel like so nothing that they live for like Alfred says, watching the world burn. It's a very similar kind of thing with Trump. He just wants to watch the world burn in terms of he just wants to see people react to things he does. That's literally all he wants. And that's not where the evangelical right's coming from. That's not and there's a scene in The Dark Knight where Alfred talks to Batman and he says the mob hired this man to get rid of Harvey Dent and get rid of Batman so the mob can get their power back. It's like the Dark Knight movies, the mob loses control and they want it back, and so they go to the Joker, but they don't understand the Joker. They don't understand that they just don't have any comprehension of how a person could actually be that way, and then everything, then in their attempt to like use this they admit like this is a this crazy thing, this psycho, we don't we're kind of scared of it, but we like the power it has. We like what it can do for us, and so that's what we're going to use it for. But but to take on the action of using that actor, using the Joker, using Trump, whatever, you're you're just totally undoing your entire project by doing that. You think, well, if people on the right, it's like we don't like Trump, we're not worshiping him, but we have to use him to get what we want. Um, there's just this huge lack of understanding that to use a vessel with no core, no um, no goal, right? To just pure id, pure power, just pure des, a endless black hole of the desire for not necessarily destruction, but for your will, just pure will, basically of um I want to be the most powerful thing. I want to be, yeah, whatever. You lose your integrity. The hypocrisy is just too great to compound with. And, all these people on the right who understand that this is a flawed vessel, but it's like, well, it's like the ends justify the means. I'm just learning more and more they really, really don't, because you don't have any, if your means aren't justified, you don't have any ends. And
Mhm.
I'll let you take it from there, Anton.
Yeah, I think your comparison to the Joker is a really good one because the other cliched comparison, which I kind of think is a little too dangerous and irreverent, is the easy kind of, you know, he's in like another Hitler, which I kind of think is a dangerous comparison to make in the sense that it diminishes the
But
severity of the Holocaust. Oh, sorry.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I was just going to agree with you there. Yeah, I do think that that's a problem to compare him to Hitler because A, like the Joker, Trump's bad. Objectively, both Hitler and the Joker are worse people so
But they're a
far,
different kind,
objectively
like you said, it's
speaking.
a different kind of thing.
They're
I
different kind,
think,
right?
yeah. Hmm.
But Hitler had a specific goal. He had a
Exactly. Yeah.
specific idea of what he wanted,
Hmm.
and Trump doesn't. Trump does
Yeah.
not
I
have
was,
a
yeah.
specific goal. Yeah,
Yeah, I kind of think that there's something about Trump that's almost childlike, and I don't mean that as a compliment, but it is like it is chaos for its own sake or
but you're
chaos
right.
for attention. I had a few friends that made a really funny analogy too. Like he's almost like a WWE pro wrestler that he's in it for the show and just for the chaos and the
He
drama,
literally
and
is.
he'll
He
like
literally was
say
in the
things.
WWE.
Yeah, he was in it, right? But it's just like he's taken that element of his persona into politics, and he is, he'll say some things that kind of, are dog whistles to the racist and stuff, but not because I think he's actually racist. I think he literally just likes to throw red meat at his base and get them riled up, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, and then it becomes kind of what's that thing like the Rorschach test is like the ink blot thing, right? It's like he'll say a bunch of things that's really chaotic, and then the people that want to read into it more charitably can do so, or the people that really kind of want him to fuel their version of like a fundamentalist nationalism will take that from
Mhm.
him. But you're right. It is there's a kind of chaos about it, and I think with trad Catholicism's alignment with it, there is very much that idea of selling your soul to the devil to get what you want. And I think there is, and I don't mean to blow it out of proportion and say Trump himself is the literal devil, but metaphorically, there's this element of you're
I know what you mean.
compromising. Yeah, it's like there is a compromise of what would have been the trad Catholicism's inner integrity, but they're kind of giving it up because they in their pursuit of power and influence, and in their mind they are of course the heroes in their own story, but it's kind of like at what cost? What are you giving up?
I want to get what you just said about the heroes of your own story. That's a really important element in all this because narrative is so tied in and integral to traditional Catholicism and all these, evangelical Christianity and everything. Something I've really noticed that's a very interesting dichotomy with sort of the left and the right is the right really they really love movies, but they
Hmm.
hate the people who make them.
That's
They
a yeah,
and the
yeah.
people, yeah,
Hmm.
and they it's sort of I think they love movies a lot more than people who make them like movies. I think it's a weird sort of thing because in order to be in the arts, you have to have a li- I don't think any I don't know, you have to have a little bit of your screws loose to be in the arts, and at least a bit, and you have to have more. Traditional Catholicism and the evangelical right wing is about creating a very safe, ordered world. It's about creating a a world where, you know, because they talk about their children so much, right? And on the right, it's like think of the children. I'm doing this for my kids. Their main goal is, and it genuinely, I think, comes out of a genuine love of your child or anything. But I think sometimes, to a degree, people what they think of is like, oh, I'm creating a perfect world for my child. No, you're creating a perfect world for you to raise your child in. But but all they think about is the period where they're actually raising their child. They don't think about necessarily, not all the time, but maybe they don't necessarily think about when that child grows up and is in the real world. Well, you know, you can't, all they've known is that safe world you've created for them, which was great, you should, but it's it's um it's a matter of taking all the information into account, taking the totality of the situation into account. And that's hard, of course, when our pesky little emotions get in the way. And that's why I'm really interested and excited to a degree about AI, but about where it can go. It could really, help separate in our personal lives the mundane, boring, tedious stuff from the thrilling artistic stuff. But we got to be careful. But in terms of narrative and story, we're s- we I think one reason why people on the right get drawn into movies more is that they live in a world that's they live in a world that's more ordered, and they live in a world that's a story. They live their lives as if they're living a narrative, and their actions they take are what the character they're imagining themselves as a character in a book to a degree, or a character in a story, and they're like, well, I would want the character to do this, that, and that if I were watching this as a movie or reading this as a book, so I'm going to do those things. I think that to a subconscious degree, that's how they think about life. Is they just because every time you go to church, it's you read stories, you're told stories often from the pulpit. We live our lives immersed in stories. But the problem is that is are they true or are they false? And is is the truth what is true? Metaphor is so tricky because, like I say, nuance is beautiful, and metaphor is a really good nuanced way of communicating information. But um, when the metaphor can't be the real thing, or you can't perceive it as the real thing, and that's the problem. Is these people are convinced that the metaphor is the actual reality, which just doesn't make any sense. But the metaphor is still important. So therefore, um, for people who lost their religious faith, lost that anchoring, for me right now, and I grew up thinking of myself as to a degree, a character in a story. And now I don't. Now I see the world as, now I see stories as not things that we create in a way. Because if you look at the totality of not just human history but world history, there's no beginning, middle, and end. Clearly, there's no satisfying narrative to it. It's so chaotic that it just completely goes against the reality. When you study it more and more, it's so much more and more chaotic
Hmm.
that it pulls us out of our ability to turn everything into a narrative and story and have it all make sense. And especially, you know, growing up, when like Wolf, the priest who hurt me, and other priests, they would when Obama was in power, they were obsessed with like this with the culture. The culture war seemed to like make a lot more sense in those times. But now that they're using Trump to get their means, and now that they're, kind of on the defensive a lot more as a result of that, you can see that they're constantly. The thing about Trump is that he makes he makes the story. He constantly changes what's supposed to happen, right? Right. Everyone gets sort of like, oh, he's this now. Oh, he's going to do this now, and then and then he doesn't, and of course. And so when you have no narrative through when they're constantly readjusting, like, well, we need Trump to get our agenda passed and delivered, but they don't fully understand, what the consequences of using an empty vessel like that, a kind of mad dog, a kind of Joker, like it it ruins their narrative. And because the narrative is so important, if that gets screwed up, if the linear structure of it, the clear beginning, middle, and end, this happens, so this happens, so this happens, if that gets messed up, then it just falls apart like a house of cards. And they're scrambling right now. Even after Trump's victory is a lot different this time because they're not as happy as they were in 2016. They understand based on experience that yeah, we got what we wanted, but this isn't gonna it's not gonna be an easy ride,
Mhm.
and it's not gonna be for either side. And so I just wanted to get off what you said about narrative and story about the character because that was such a key insight on your
Mhm.
part. But do you have a
Yeah,
response?
I think what you said is really on point. Like a narrative in a way serves as a very powerful organizing principle in the midst of like just a lot of the chaos and the absurdity of being alive. So and it's and you can see it too, just the I mean, I spend an ungodly amount of time on social media and on Twitter, which has probably caused me to lose more than a few brain cells. But even just the how they're structuring everything in a narrative, like that Trump is somehow like this uh this emperor figure, and they'll literally have AI generated images of Trump wearing like Roman centurion armor, or Trump in the arms of Jesus,
Hmm.
or something. Like they've really constructed this narrative about how he's a pseudo divine, almost like a King David type figure for tradcasts, or for conservatives and evangelical
Yeah.
Protestants more broadly. And same thing too with the it's really sad. Like even even as a Catholic, like the phrase "Christ is King" is should be yesterday was Christ the King, um, the feast of Christ the King. And it's so sad how I kind of feel like that phrase has begun to leave a really poor taste in my mouth, because it's been taken over by these really toxic triumphalist people that are using it to sort of beat down the people that they think
Yeah.
are their enemies. And I think that's
Well,
the one of the most dangerous aspects of this is when taken to such an extreme degree, all of this narrative, especially surrounding spiritual warfare, where you quite literally demonize other human beings. You don't even care to
mhm,
see that, okay, even if you don't agree with everything they say, but why don't you at least try to appreciate the human concerns behind their opinions that are not yours, that look at the emotional, psychological, physical elements of their concerns, and see the humanity of their concerns, rather than just say they're all under the influence of the devil. Like the moment you really pledge yourself to a fanatical degree to that spiritual warfare narrative, you lose the ability for dialogue, and that's extremely dangerous. And
mhm.
that's, I think, that sense of certainty that trads often project it's dependent on their enclosure. They have to stay isolated, or else like their sense of certainty could easily be threatened the moment they open their minds.
Yeah, exactly. It's the most fragile. It's one of the most fragile structures I've ever encountered or ever seen. With this veneer of we have all the answers. We're the authorities on everything. But there's no, you know, part of the reason been I've heard people say that they don't when I've talked to people about my experience who don't have the same lived experience with trad Catholicism as you or I or Kevin or Kay do, they will respond, it's like, well, this thing is so disorganized, right? Because there's no like leader, traditional Catholic leader, right? There's no like figurehead. Vigano might be the closest, but the thing that's so funny about this is that, within the trad Cath world, you're trying, they're all trying to be the best Catholics, but they end up leaving out, tech,
Yeah.
technically speaking, leaving the church because it's just the way the church is supposed to be structured and what they're saying is going on now with Francis and Vatican II. It's just and you hear them say like this is an unprecedented crisis in the church. This is a time where they're by their own actions completely out to sea, completely um trapped and stuck because they'll say like, well, how can we rebuild the church without the unbroken line of succession, right? How could we create another pope? There's literally no way.
Yeah.
There's literally no way for them to get what they want without saying we're just going to do a do-over again.
Yeah.
They get so far into their um, their sense of self-righteousness, their sense of self-righteous anger, their desire to enter the right, you know, which I want to acknowledge as a good thing to a degree because it's like their personal integrity. They're acting on what you believe in. But if you're being willfully blind and if you're clearly not opening yourself to the possibility of being wrong, I don't think um, I- if that's the case, then your intensity, your like confidence is almost evil. It's not to be respected at all. If like confidence and like looking at someone and being like, wow, he sure believed in what he was doing. Well, if he's not opening himself up to the possibility that he's wrong, then I don't think he truly is being honest that
Hmm.
he really does believe that. I think it's he's trying to ultimately serve himself rather than others or the truth. And so again, yeah, it's just tying it all back to everything, the house of cards falling down and everything. When you hitch your wagon to a tornado or to a hurricane, the tornado is just it's not the tornado's not thinking I'm going to destroy this town and this town and this town and here's my trajectory and here's why I'm doing it. It just is. It's just doing what it's doing and it's not and that's with Trump is kind of the same way. He was just so broken and so damaged at an early age that it's just an empty hole, empty void. It's pure. Um, it, it it's like yeah, the almost an animal like childlike kind of drive or or motivation. That is especially that is you know normal in children, I guess, but to see it in an adult is just extremely disturbing and sad. And that's another really important element here in within traditional Catholicism is the intentional arrested development, the intentional because they keep talking about childlike faith and childlike submission and all of that, but they don't but that can't be all you have. Simply saying I'm just going to have childlike faith and accept and just trust and leave it at that. That's Jesus takes the wheel. That's that's deeply immoral, I believe. I used to not think that way. I used to think that that kind of attitude and belief and structure was commendable. It was a good thing to be that way, but now I understand it's very, very bad to be that way because you are to be willfully reckless, to understand the potential risks of your actions, not only to yourself but to others, but to do it anyway because you just believe in what you believe in that much, that's not right. And uh, that's why I'm not optimistic, but I'm not fearful at the same time about future trad Catholicism because, again, with Project 2025 and their whole agenda, their idea that we can sort of like they talk about how we're against the Great Reset. Well, they're trying in a sense to do a reset to they keep saying return to old values, and there's just no that just doesn't happen in human history where a civilization or a group of people looks at the past and then does a complete reset and goes backward. We don't operate that way. There's just too much information out there for for that to be viable, and that's the sad thing here. That's the emotional need for belonging, the emotional need for narrative, the emotional need for mission, for meaning. That refusal to understand that the world really is a chaotic mess. That doesn't mean we need to be unhappy. That doesn't mean we need to have the chaos in us. I think I think it's very, very good to or what brings out the good in us is to say, well, the world is chaotic, but I won't be.
Hmm.
I will be what I will manifest what I want to happen. Um, again, as best in accordance with reality as I can. Not just getting into this complete, well, I'm just going to completely abandon and trust you 100%. Um, and I think another issue in all of this element is that with faith, with belief that there's a divine mechanism behind all this, because again, when you listen to tradcasts and they'll say, well, I don't understand, but God's going to fix it, or God's, I don't, all these tradcast commentators, I don't know how the crisis in the church will be handled, but God's obviously going to fix it. And you either have that or you don't. And that's that kind of like that sense of presence, that sense that God or Jesus is as present to you as you are to me right now. That's really something that's not super easy to articulate exactly how you get there and how that comes about. You just either have it or you don't, and I just don't anymore. I just don't. I hear nothing. See nothing. I feel nothing in terms of like a divine presence or a divine connection. But I look at these people and I understand the power of that. But it's like I don't know how to get it back in a way that's gives me integrity, where I'm living in according to reality. And so, with everything I just said, Anton, where do you see it going? Maybe in the next 4 years when the next election comes. I know that Harrison Butker got blew up earlier this year when he gave that Tradcath speech,
Yeah,
and Trad Catholicism is kind of getting more into the mainstream kind of culture a bit. And people are more aware of it. It seems
for
like,
sure.
and more aware of
Yeah,
what's going on with
even
Vatican
I
II
don't
and
know
all
if you
that. So,
saw
where
that.
do you see it going?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if you saw that Father Ripperger was actually at Mar-a-Lago at Trump's residence, which is kind of
Really,
surprised. Yeah, he was.
that
I guess he
doesn't.
was brought on by. I don't quite know who Jack Posobiec is, but I know he's like a big conservative figure.
I
So
think he's a friend of Charlie Kirk's, and they're
okay,
both in the yeah.
yeah.
But
So yeah,
I'm
Trump
not
or sorry,
surprised at all
yeah,
that
Father Ripperger
Ripperger
was there. Yeah,
went to Mar-a-Lago. I really need to. I've been researching him and writing just notes for my deep dive video on Ripperger, which is probably I want this to be the most intensive or most nitpicky academic thing I've done in terms of traditional Catholicism
I
because
think
I think
and
that
he's a big enough
if
figure that
he's
he
the
needs. Yeah, he needs like
the more
pushback.
he's exposed,
Hmm.
yeah, I guess he's sort of the new Vigano in a way because Vigano is now excommunicated, but Ripperger is still technically a Catholic still. And it's funny, even though Vigano's excommunicated, a lot of trad Cath outlets are still um, taking him seriously and propping him up, which is funny because and again, the contradiction is too much even for them. Like they can't handle the contradiction of how are we supposed to be Catholic and submit to this authority structure when we don't believe the authority structure is
Hmm.
genuine. How do we undo that? It's like literally impossible with the structure of the Catholics, but so they're just stuck. They're in a rock and a hard place that they refuse to step out of. And so, yeah, part of me says, that can't survive, it can't sustain itself. But they've definitely latched on and piggybacked onto you know the right the Trump era and the right wing rave wave and reaction, which is I don't think I think um, ultimately Trump's not that effective, and that may seem weird. It's like, well, he seems to have been pretty effective in a lot of ways, but I think he's not effective in terms of making any of this last or stick, or he can't bring about any kind of change institutionally that's going to. It might be what the right wants, but when they actually but so much when they actually get what they want, they understand and they look at what happened, what really happens. Like when they overturned Roe v. Wade, for example.
Hmm.
I remember for the longest time that everyone was they would all say, all we got to do is overturn Roe v. Wade and that's it, and that solves the problem. But they realized pretty quickly that it made it made their problems worse in a way. I mean, Trump still won, but it codified abortion into law permanently in so many different states like
Hmm.
Kansas. And so the problem is that, they in their minds they get so fixed on their perceived integrity, their perceived moral good on this, and they don't you can't you can't have integrity without information. If you're refusing to take all factors into account, I've said this a million times, I feel like a broken record. You don't have integrity. But that's uh I say it so many times, but it's such an obvious thing to me, but it seems so, and of course, it's I'm not saying I'm 100%, innocent of that, but it's something I always try to strive for and be aware of that I don't think they're aware of. So, yeah, let me ask you, Anton, in 4 years, in the US specifically, I know you're in Canada right now, but you're
Yeah,
originally
yeah.
from the US,
Yep,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Do you see traditional Catholicism specifically getting bigger or smaller?
That's a good question. It's hard to tell for now, but what one thing I will say specifically regarding the Trump victory and what that does is I kind of feel that it will reinforce the social values and social policies that traditional Catholics want. But I think as a religion, I don't necessarily think that as a religion, like the more supernatural and theological elements will get greater appeal because America is still, America's I would say a lot more conservative than many other, and I don't mean that as a value judgment. I just mean like I think we are really quite conservative. I know that we have a lot of, I know there's a lot of backlash against so-called woke and liberal stuff, but I honestly feel that that hasn't really taken root. I think as a country we're still pretty conservative, but we're also much more evangelical Protestant than we are Catholic in our kind of national theology. If I'm going to paint in broad strokes, I don't think that Trump is going to mean that more people are going to pray the rosary or accept the true Eucharistic presence. So I don't think it necessarily will reinforce traditional Catholic theology, but I think it will. It'll allow a kind of traditional Catholic conservatism or a traditional Catholic adjacent conservatism to thrive. So I kind of think the more, I guess, what you could say, um, the more societal or secular elements within secular or within traditional Catholicism will thrive. But I don't think that I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but I guess what you could say are the more superstitious elements of trad
Yeah,
Catholicism will flourish. And in some ways, I feel like anytime politicians, will make reference to spiritual warfare and say Christ the King, and then will say, "Oh, this is like these Democrats are the work of the devil." I honestly have a hard time accepting that they believe that. I kind of feel that a lot of these theological things are much more like they're rhetorical tools to get your voters excited about something. But I don't necessarily think that the leaders actually 100% buy into this. That's a difficult thing with theology, is that it can, especially with people that are influencers or leaders, it can be very difficult to pin down how sincerely they believe a lot of these things. It's just, these things are historically very effective rhetorical tools to get people to vote or think and see the world a certain way. And I think if there's one thing more broadly, kind of this relates to traditional Catholicism, but also just the state of the country in general. I think that this election, like the biggest winner in this election, is fear, because both sides, whether you're trying to get people to fear another 4 years of Trump, or from the conservative point of view, it's like you're trying to get people to fear immigrants taking your job, or fear all the trans people and all the LGBTQ infecting your children with these ideas, or abortion's just going to go wild, and all of these it was this election was so much more about fear of what the other side is going to do, rather than here are the positive things we can come together as a nation and do. um and I think, even if you listen to the rhetoric, so much of it is about like fear of judgment, fear of like the 3 days of darkness, fear of going to hell, fear of losing our souls, fear of like these I wish this
Right.
were a joke, but yeah, fear of like these Democrats and their child sacrifice cult, and how they drink the blood of
Right.
all these like insane. You'd think that these are the ravings of people in an asylum, but these conspiracy theories are out there, and it's kind of wild that these are
Well,
acceptable
studying
parts of the public
history,
discord. Mm-hmm.
yeah, for me, studying history is really good at honestly both stoking fears but also alleviating them at the same time, because you really do start to see patterns, and you understand too that technology doesn't fix our problems. It fixes some of our problems, but there's always going to be an unintended counter effect with every technological advancement that we can't anticipate until we're living it. And again, when you look at history, but as a predictor of the future, though, that's the problem, because it's like you can look at history to sort of teach you like how we behave, why we do things, but to think like, well, history repeats itself. No, it doesn't. George Lucas said history rhymes sometimes, but it doesn't necessarily repeat itself. I think one of the reasons it repeats itself is we look at the is people trying to, you know, it happens so often where if you're obsessed with a certain outcome not happening and you try to do everything in your power to make it happening, that's inevitably going to make it more likely to happen, because the scenario's just in your mind so much, it just manifest it unintentionally. And for them, with their constant living in, when you study history and you find that they're constantly prophets within church history. They constantly think the end of the world is imminent.
Oh
It,
yeah, for sure.
St. Paul kind of thought it's very clear that St. Paul seems to think it's all going to happen within their lifetime. And something that is funny now looking back on it is these trad priests would quote, fathers from the past who are saying like, this is the worst age we've ever lived in. There's just so much sin in the world, and the priest will be like, this guy is saying this in 1845, and this priest can't believe the amount of sin in the world. Can you imagine what he would say today? And I'm like, if he would, if he were alive today, I'm pretty sure he would say like, oh well, I didn't know we'd get here this far. I didn't know humanity would still be here. So his reaction would be just first surprise that that Jesus didn't come back in the 1800s or the 1500s or the 1200s or whatever. Um, you know, if you really want to like, I really took them to task in that instance where these priests were like, what would they think if they were alive today? What would Saint blah 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 think if he were alive today? I think he would think I was wrong if he were
Mm-hmm.
alive today. I think there would be so many things that these people would see that would prove them wrong, because there would be so many other aspects of their worldview that would be challenged if they were to see the future. That would be undone if they were to see the future. And so that's why you can't live in a narrative. story. Like you can't live as if you're living in the story
Hmm.
because the future you know you're you know the ending already if you're living in the story, right? It's like I have to get to this ending. This it needs to be the ending for my
Hmm.
life. It can't be this. But
And then you
when
kind of
you
become a
step
like a
out,
self-fulfilling you kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy
exactly,
when you
it's a
put yourself in
self-fulfilling
this
thing. That's
story.
what I talked about. How when you try to avoid some, when you're
Hmm.
obsessed with the scenario and try to avoid it, you often manifest it.
Hmm.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. That's
Yeah,
when that goes back to, thinking you're living in a story.
for sure.
Or you're not. It's like,
Hmm.
I used to, you know, when I was a kid, I kind of had a phase where I thought I was Truman from the Truman Show. I thought that the world was fake and everything because I saw things that didn't make sense to me, and I thought, well, if they don't make sense, then it's not real,
Yeah,
and
that's a really
I
big thing.
think
Like
that
that, if it doesn't make sense, like I think that kind of speaking to the fragility of the view that you pointed out. I think with the most rigid variants of Catholicism, I think there's a very deep discomfort with paradox. Like if it doesn't fit within their narrow view of how things should be, they have to call it like gravely evil or
well,
intrinsically disordered. They can't
humanity.
like sit with paradox.
Well, that's a human thing. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a human thing to not feel comfortable to sit with paradox.
Hmm.
Obviously, clearly. I mean, that's not irrational in any way. The frustrating is that um, to me, paradox, as far as I can tell right now, um, the core is paradox. The core of existence is paradox. That doesn't necessarily mean that and you might hear that and think, okay, well that means everything's chaos and nothing matters. No, no. I know from my lived experience that happiness matters, that integrity matters, that I want that what matters to me is, everyone around me to be doing well and everything. And so that's me trying to recognizing the chaos in the world and trying to be the agent to undo it, as opposed to I'm the chaos and everything around me is ordered. That's the belief set you get into, right? It's like I'm the it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. It's
Hmm.
that that original sin idea where we're all inherently flawed, yes, but we're all inherently good, and we all can use the toolbox up here however we want to. It's not like we're all given a flawed instrument. We are, but we're also given if we have the curiosity and have the drive, we can work on that toolbox ourselves to try to get to what is the most objective good, the most objective standard. Um, Again, from that sort of like hypothetical AI godlike third person um, unbiased kind of viewpoint. But we're coming on onto an hour. We should wrap up pretty soon. Thank you so much, Anton, for coming on again. And I just
Yeah,
need
for
to
sure.
get myself ready for Kevin's discussion. I think I'm definitely going to uh, take some of the stuff we discussed and bring it
That'll be
up with
cool.
Kevin
Kind of connecting the
tonight. I hope.
threads between podcasts. Like we're all making little
Yeah, yeah.
cameos in each other's.
I'm a believer. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in just trying to work. Yeah, just synchronize, synergize,
Yeah, no, honestly,
and
all of the
collaborate.
difficulties that we're navigating, it's so much better when it's a team effort that we can kind of hopefully enrich each
Right,
other's inner world and
right,
navigate all of this difficulty together. You know.
right. And before we sign off here, Anton, I want to get your thoughts on one more issue,
Sure,
because
absolutely.
you just brought up, team effort and collaboration and everything. Um, in the Tradcast influencer world, they talk about unite the clans. They, like I said earlier, they're aware of how dysfunctional they are and how dysfunctional they look, but they just don't. They're hampered by the structure of Catholicism, of what to do, how do we solve it. They just have no idea at the end of the
Hmm.
day. They try to work together. They try to attempt to sort of like let's as traditionalists let's all coalesce and form a and they can really on the surface they're really good at making giving the appearance sometimes that they are unified, that they are coherent. But you poke down and you look just a little bit, you look at what they're saying amongst themselves, you realize it's not true. Uh, in I think to them, within that world as well, the hardcore right wing evangelical world of we're living in God's story and God's narrative, and we just have to, do what the characters should do. There's a element of fake it till you make it kind of attitude. If we just put on the appearance, the outward appearance of this is all going well and we're all unified and we all agree on the same page and we're not chaotic and we're not disordered. When you have that, insist on that veneer when the reality is so different, that's their Achilles heel. That's the problem. Whereas now, I've gotten comments from people about like you, you seem a little like mentally unwell. You seem a little like like you don't have all your shit together. Yeah, none of us do. I'm open about that. I have I am not at all um a- as best I can trying to pretend to be something I'm not. Despite being in the arts, despite being an actor, despite being a writer, I'm doing all that stuff to try and get to the truth, not to and to create metaphor and to create false ideas or yeah to create experiences and narratives and storylines for people that can enrich them and propel them forward in life and not mat and not attach them to my worldview to not because I honestly don't know if I can say I have a worldview at the moment. My worldview view view and react accordingly. And I don't at the moment have any kind of like uh, I just want the best possible. I just want happiness for everyone and peace on earth. And I don't know how to achieve that, but I'm not pretending like I've got I've got the secret ingredient, that I've got the treasure map. There isn't one. It's within all of us, and that the actions each one of us take to improve the world is going to be very different. And that veneer of we're all in agreement, we're all unified. If we can just get rid of that, we can be unified on the golden rule, on treat others as the way you want to be treated. But the more complicated you try to make that unifying element, the worse off you're going to be. And that's why I don't see traditional Catholicism. I think in the short term, in the next few years, they're going to have some good. They're going to get some stuff they want. But I think that the the structure of it, especially um, with whoever the next pope will be, who I'm almost positive will just be pretty much like Francis, no indications otherwise, that 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 will just get the traditional Catholic world will just get more and more like of in their culture wars might get they're definitely going to get some culture war advancements, but the interior issues and the interior rots and problems is just going to get much more worse, and therefore I don't see them having too much success. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of funny parallels between trad Catholicism and Protestantism. For all the jokes that we make about Protestants, like, oh, they don't like it, they don't like something, they'll just go form their own denomination. I've come to realize that trad Catholicism is very similar.
That's all it
I've
is.
sort of like followed this, like, rabbit hole of like, first there's just like a very conservative Novus Ordo, and then there's like, the TLM, and then the FSSP, and then there's the SSPX, and there's the SSPV, and then you've got the Diamond or Diamond Brothers, and I've sort of gotten little samples of how just when you think you've reached like peak traditional Catholicism, there's like another rabbit hole to go down, and how
Yeah,
there's a yeah,
exactly.
it just keeps shrinking,
It
and
never
yeah,
ends.
mm-hmm,
You're constantly told we're the real traditionalists, and then you're
mm-hmm,
like, okay, and you might go to them, but then there's deeper. They're like, oh, you believe those traditionalists? No, they're totally off the, and it's like a Russian, uh,
Yeah, it's like the
like
yeah,
one of those
exactly the
dolls,
Russian doll. And the
and
sad thing
it just
too,
keeps going and
yeah,
going and going.
and the sad thing too is
Yeah,
like the further the deeper you get, or at least this is my experience. I don't want to say this is necessarily everybody's experience, but just the way I see it, it's that the smaller the group gets, the talking points really become like, we have the truth, everybody else has falsehoods. We are the only ones with a sliver of hope to be saved. Everybody else is
yeah,
screwed, unless by some act of God. But they'll be like, oh, God is a God of justice, so these people aren't saved, they don't have the truth. And it becomes this sense of security of like, I like, we're okay, we're the good guys, our souls are going to be saved in the next life. And you do have to it really leans heavily into that in group out group, who's saved, who's damned, who's in possession of the one truth that will save,
right.
whatever small remnant of humanity. And then it's one of those things that, looking at it from the outside, I mean, because even if I grew up in a pretty conservative Novus Ordo, and even Kevin says it's pretty trad, I would still say it's on the softer end of trad Catholicism. And then you kind of go deeper into the
Me
rabbit
too.
hole. Yeah, you kind of go deeper into the rabbit hole, and you sort of real I mean, on the one hand you're
Right.
horrified, but on the other hand you also are moved with a kind of pity about how these people have really dug themselves into a hole. um so much so that it's like they kind of like what you were saying about narrative, they take their narrative and their worldviews and they force the world into it. And there's no sense of flexibility. Like, why don't you just take a minute, catch your breath, let why don't you give yourself like the grace of 5 minutes to let your sense perception teach you something about reality, interact with people that you
Yeah,
normally
because
wouldn't,
the stakes are too big, because the
hmm
more you get into this, the higher the stakes get, and it's like, no,
hmm
if I rest for 1 second, we're all going to go to hell. So,
yeah.
or it's all going to, so you got to just dedicate yourself more and more, and you keep thinking, because of this, it's an ancient idea that, um, in the ancient world, when they didn't have, um, the information we have now, when they didn't, it doesn't mean they were better people. It just means they
hmm
were more equipped than they were. The will, uh, sheer force, was in that kind of wilderness type world was far more necessary than it is today. We built up, from that, but, the problem is the traditional attitude of like, if you keep it pure at the beginning, it's not going to change and it's not going to be corrupted. That's just not how humans work. We can't. Nothing works like that. We can't, take anything and hold on to it without changing it, uh, for any significant amount of time, and we're just lying to ourselves and getting up more and more of a near. If traditional Catholics are so obsessed with the aesthetic and look, because it makes it so much easier for them to enter the headspace of this is all legitimate, this is all correct, because I'm constantly surrounded by, I'm smelling this incense, I'm around these people, and it's like, oh, if I put myself into the environment, I'll believe it. Yeah, maybe, but it's not going to make it true. And also, I I would say that the paradox here, when you get with, especially with trad Catholicism, is where you try to get deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, like the Russian nesting dolls. You get lonelier and lonelier. When the whole point of all this is to be a part of a community, is
hmm
to be a part of something that makes you feel like you're bigger than yourself. But in trad Catholicism, the further you go, you become part of a smaller group, and then a smaller group, and then a smaller group, and then a smaller group, until it's just you. And you've got nothing. You've got no support system, but but in your mind, you're right. You've got your little blog, you've got your little YouTube channel, and you're the one person basically that is 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 like the real Catholic here. And pretty much every single other Catholic institution is wrong. That's where it leads you, and you can see example after example of that, of someone who's starting off getting into trad Catholicism, and eventually becoming a sedevacantist. And it's like, oh, I'm outside the church now. And yeah, that's why I don't, uh, again, just from a purely non-emotional, for me, rational sort of the bird's eye view scientific level, that sort of um, disorder and chaos and there not being any integrity to that structure is what makes me not believe in it. But also, just from a human needs viewpoint, you're going to get trad Catholicism inevitably makes you very, very lonely. It isolates you like nothing else almost, because it never it never stops. The the justifications, the explanations, the canon law says this, but this pope said that. It just
For
becomes
sure.
a
I think the
nightmare.
other thing too,
And
and you
and I
know this too.
and I'm with you
Yeah.
there that I feel sorry for those people
Yeah.
to a degree. Yeah.
I'm with you there. The other thing that's very difficult about everything you just mentioned too is that you're also taught that suffering is the default state. And if you're having it too easy, you're doing something wrong. And so it kind of makes you
Yeah.
complacent
Yeah.
and I'm not saying, suffering is a part of this life, but there's a great difference between Jesus telling you to take up your cross, but with trad sometimes it's like make up your cross. Like
Yeah.
to,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Make your own cross. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Um.
Um
So
so
so I think of it. I think that when you get into that narrative view of life, that can easily make things. It's like, well, this was supposed to happen. It was meant to be, that this happened. And there are certain things where like, no, it shouldn't have happened to you. Like you were we're all victims of something to a degree. We've all had something done to us that simply shouldn't have been. And it's only after the fact that you go and say, well, this would, nobody has like that. Well, nobody anticipates an awful thing happening and is like, well, I'm at peace with that because it's God's will. No, you're going to try and prevent it. But after it already happens, that's when you have to get into, well, God had a meaning for it. God intended it, and that's that's the problem of narrative thinking, I guess you could say. And when you step back and say, no, the world's chaotic. There's no narrative. There's no story to all this. I'm gonna make my own. I'm gonna write the story though. I'm going to shape and sculpt and create uh my life in a beneficial way. When you have that attitude, you you look at bad things that happen and you say, yes, that shouldn't have happened. But now that it has, what can we do about it that is the best productive? Not to say that, this was all meant to happen in the beginning. Like you were meant to lose your spouse, you were meant to lose your arm. No, but you say, okay, it happened. There's nothing we can do about it. What can we do now? That's a very different thing than saying God intended for that to happen.
Yeah,
You know
or
what I
you
mean? And
always
that's
deserve to suffer, and
right.
or the whole economy of grace maxing, that you can kind of use your suffering in a transactional way for the salvation of your soul and the souls of others, which
Right.
I think is powerful in the sense that it gives meaning when you're in the midst of suffering and you're desperately looking for a reason. I think that's why it's such a powerful idea that your suffering has a reason. But I bet there is a sense of, like, even when your suffering doesn't have any inherent meaning, you can do your best to draw a lesson from it so that you don't repeat that suffering or you don't accidentally hurt someone in the same way. But I do think that when you're taught that suffering should be the default, then it just puts you in this low
then
state of
then
just
you then you
yeah,
make it
you're
you're going to start making it happen. You're
yeah.
going to start and that's when you become the bad guy. When you start
Hmm.
making suffering happen to
For
others,
sure. And also, like,
even if you're completely deluded.
you're much easier to manipulate because you think you should be miserable all the time. And so when the system is
Right.
is mistreating you or putting you in these really difficult circumstances, you just sort of take it because you've been taught that that's just how it is.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The future looks bright and sunny, of course. As we've established, nothing but bright sunny skies ahead for all of us. But
Yeah.
but seriously though, I'd say that, the next 4 years in this country are going to be going to be interesting and tough, but I think that we've learned a lot. I think we've learned a lot about ourselves in these last 10 years or so. And I also think that the cultural shifts now, they used to happen, they used to span decades. Like it used to be there would be a decade of a very clear sort of cultural attitude or vibe. You can look at the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and see that. Now it's happening within the same decade. It's like 5 years and then a switch back and then 5 years. So the pendulum swing is happening so much quicker now that that's going to produce a, a calm. I think that's going to inevitably produce a calming effect just out of necessity, just out of sheer, um, you know, physics almost. Like there'll be a general calming and a general looking. And I think with AI too, where we can start to see things way more objectively in the future without the filters of our emotions, I think that's going to make a huge difference too. A lot of people are nervous about AI, and you should be to a degree, but I, at the moment, am overall more positive than negative in my feelings about it. But it's going to be a huge part of our lives soon, even more than it is now, and it's going to affect everything we've been talking about for sure. And I'll just say right now that I don't see I see traditional Catholicism in the right in general making short-term advances, but the integrity of the whole structure is getting more and more um, ridiculous. It's being exposed more and more as flawed, and that's going to have an effect as well. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Anton?
Um, you know what? The next few years with the Trump presidency are going to be very interesting. Everybody get out your popcorn, but also keep the lines of communication open, because I think in a time where, like you said, these shifts are happening so quickly, I think the most beneficial thing is to just, you know, wherever you are in the spectrum of trad to non-trad to, maybe searching for your spirituality, I think conversation and
Yeah,
engaging with people outside your comfort zone is the way to healing and the way to deeper insight, I would say.
yeah. Communicate with others and
Mm-hmm.
with yourself. Educate others and yourself. And yeah, communicate and educate
Mm-hmm.
and be receptive. Uh, well, thank you very much, Anton, for this. This was great. We definitely covered a lot. I'll have you on again for sure. I've had a hiatus from conversations a bit on the Dragons of Victory. I've just been doing the solo stuff, but I think my my thoughts are far more clearer and make a lot more sense when I'm engaging with someone else. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna, talk to Kevin tonight. Want to talk to Cade soon. So got more stuff
Nice.
coming.
Yeah, keep me
Check
posted.
out
It's
Anton's
yeah.
channel, everybody. Yeah, check out Anton's channel, everybody. Check out his piano stuff as well as his commentary on my channel and Kevin's and whatnot. I'll put the link down there in the description. Thank you all so much. Hope you will fly away to victory. Signing off.